Hey everyone, we're going to look at quadratic functions. This is the beginning of Unit 3. And we'll see very often with a quadratic function, you'll see what they call standard form, which puts the order of the exponents in order. So if you talk about like part B, which of these first are quadratics? Well, quadratics have exponents that could be either a 2, a 1, or a 0 for the variable. So like in the case of B, we have 2 that fit that bill. Those 2 right there. And for part C, they're asking us to write it in standard form. So like I was talking about up here, this is standard form. And in the case of what we have, you got to pay attention to your signs. So if we're going to rewrite this in standard form for graphing purposes, it'd be, in this case, because it's 10 minus 3x squared plus 7x, it'd be negative 3x squared plus 7x plus 10. So I got to take into account the sign that comes before the number as I'm writing it. And again, a minus sign like this is here is the same as a negative number, negative value. And then for part D, they want us to find the value of f is negative 2. It says not using a calculator, but we use a calculator for all the things on the regions. Really, all you would have to do for this, we talked about this in Unit 1, you just take the negative 2, you take a negative 2, you plug it in for x. And you can put that in yourself and see what you get out for an answer. So what that means is that point, negative 2, and then whatever the answer is you get, would be a point on that graph. Now we're going to get into some graphs for our quadratic functions. So if you go down to exercise 2, and we're going to talk a little about vocabulary and some of the terms that we're going to see. When we talk about a quadratic function like x squared, it's pretty basic. All you got to do is go to y equals on your graph screen and then type in the x and the squared button. And I'm going to just take a look. First, I'm going to change this to graph table. And then I'm going to hit second in graph. And now they want us to fill in this part of the table right here from negative 3 to 3. So I'm going to adjust my table by moving it up. Now, those values that are on my table in the calculator, I'm just going to fill those in. So we got 9410, 149. So you're going to see some repeats of the values that you get for the outputs, the y values. And like I talked about before, that blinking the cursor, the x on the graph, so negative 3, 9, if I'm finding that point, it's 3 to the left, 9 up. And then I'm just going to finish filling in the rest of these points. Then I can draw the graph, put the name of the function, this is f of x, and that's pretty much the graph for this. Now it's asking for the range of this function. Well, I noticed that both my arrows are going up, and the range is the y values, so I know it doesn't go below that line at all, which that line on my y-axis would be 0. So I know that my range is going to be every value that y is greater than or equal to 0. So that's more your basic quadratic function. Nothing complicated, but again, use the calculator for all these, especially on the regions. Now going over to the back page, for exercise number 3, kind of the same thing we just talked about. It threw this in standard form for us. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a plot. I'm going to go back to y equals. I got my x squared in there already. Then I got minus 2x minus 8. And then I'm going to hit second in graph. Now what I'm going to look for is, I'm going to look for the vertex. So I'm going to look for this point right here. I'm looking for when my calculator, that x, gets to that point. Because I'm going to focus my center on that point. So I'm going to go ahead and move my calculator screen, move that cursor on the table. So I got a vertex of 1, negative 9. So I'm going to focus my table around that point. And I'm going to do 3 on each side. So I'll do negative 2, 0. Just down a little more. Negative 2, 0, negative 1, negative 5. 0, negative 8, 1, negative 9. Then going back in the other direction, back up, we got 4, 0. So, alright, so we got those points. I'm going to go ahead and start graphing those points. And again, if I get ahead of you, feel free to pause the video, catch up. You could also fit negative 3, 7, and 5, 7. Okay, so there are a couple more that could fit. I'm going to draw that in. I'll throw a label on it. So, and there's a few parts that go with this. B says state the range. We talked about that. So this graph is not going to go any lower than this value, which from our table ended up being 0.1, negative 9. So everything has got to be greater than or equal to negative 9 for our range. And they want to know when the domain, which is our x values we talked about prior to this unit, when those are increasing. So they start increasing at this point where that vertex is going right. So in that case, that's the x value of 1. So the domain values where it's increasing is going to be everything that's greater than or equal to positive 1. For part D, it says the vertex, the turning point. We talked about that already. That's that point where you make that turn, which is 1, negative 9. And they want us to draw an axis of symmetry and write the equation for it. So the axis of symmetry is the line that cuts the graph perfectly in half. So I'm just going to kind of do a little dashed line here. And when you write the axis of symmetry equation, it's based on which the x value is. So in this case, it's where x equals 1. And again, that makes sense that it's x equals 1 because that turning point was 1, negative 9. Now, very often they have you distinguish between these two, the axis of symmetry and the vertex. They do end up being, well, the vertex is where the axis of symmetry crosses the line. And that 1, that x value, is part of that vertex. So, as you're looking through the questions, again, make sure you make some accurate graphs. Write the table because that's showing work. And look for some of those vocabs, and feel free to go back and forth between the video and the assignment.